Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. We are going to look at lesson number 8, and the main component of that is the plant system design, and that is, for me, one of the highlights. Well, not one of the highlights. It's one of my strong points in terms of my background and career is putting plants together, and I really enjoy it. So I hope to be able to share a little bit of Hmm. Share a bit of insight for you as you are putting this together, because it can be a little bit daunting. Um, I know when I was first starting out in the landscape trade, I was working at Stanley Park in Vancouver here and trying to as a trial for an apprenticeship spot. And the gardener I was working with asked me to plant an area with just some annuals, and it was kind of a nothing area. It wasn't really viewed by the public. It was near our kind of work compound, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I managed to plant the tall plants in the front. No, yeah, the tall stuff in the front and the small stuff in the back. It wasn't. It was a great lesson though. So um, that is one of the things about the plant system design element is learning through observation after you've done something. And if we look at perennial plantings, that's a really long process because we'll plant out a garden, you'll take a look at it, perhaps that year. So there's almost like a year cycle to get a little bit of feedback from it, and it could be more. So it takes a few years to get all that under your belt. That's for sure, till you're comfortable with it. Let us take a look at the assignment itself. And I don't think there's any. Here, I'll just share my screen here. There we go. I believe I didn't see any questions. No. Of course, we'll take questions through the call here, and we'll touch on all this. So if we look at the SWOT analysis, so the local plant survey is 4 points, and the rest of the assignment is 14, so a total of 18 points. So you can see the local plant survey is fairly minor in comparison. Important nonetheless. It's good to know what plants are growing in your backyard and what sort of value they have and how they were used. And for me, that came much later in my career when I really started to dial into native plants and the medicinal properties that they have. I was really lucky. My wife and business partner, she took a year-long herbalist course. Gosh, this was about 8 years ago, and had a quite a profound impact on her. And she has really utilized that a lot in our household. So I would encourage anybody to learn more and more about their local plants because there is so much they can offer. Um, yeah, so they're great. So even though this is a minor part of the whole assignment, it is very interesting and quite a deep topic. So if we look at that part, pretty straightforward. Just want to have 5 native or naturalized. So I'm not sure if people realize the difference in this, but native, of course, is, as it says, a native plant to the area, and naturalized can be plants that have found themselves to your local area and have perpetuated themselves so that they are behaving as if they are native. Himalayan blackberry can be, even though it's an invasive, it has definitely naturalized itself. So there's quite a few that fall into that category. And we want to know, what the uses are, how people historically used it, when they would eat it, um, and one wild food that people historically ate during each season. And then we're getting into nurseries where you'd buy those, and for farms. So again, pretty straightforward. If we look at, I'll just skim, this is the template file that we're looking at here. So again, pretty straightforward. We want a minimum of 3, and then a little bit of a write-up on a plant through each season, common name, Latin name, your nurseries, and the farms in your area, and then, of course, a SWOT analysis. So that gives you a little bit of an idea there. The big part of the assignment, of course, is the plant system design. So what are we doing in this? Well, just to be clear, we're not asking you to design your whole property in this part of the assignment. And some people do get confused about that. They include a very, very large section of their project site within this part of the assignment. And you don't have to do that at all. We're just really looking at one area that you're going to build on. And of course, you're going to utilize that for your overall design, whether it be the zone 1 or an area outside of zone 1. So it doesn't have to be a huge area. It's going to be a multi-species, so that's an important piece here. And I would say, along with that, we'd want to see a multi-layered, and I'll certainly provide you some examples here. And it's going to take the form of a guild. And that's a little bit of a term that can throw some people. But basically, a guild is a community of plants that tend to get along well. And often they do that because they like similar conditions. And if you look at a good example is if you even look at the edge of a forest and you see all the different layers that are involved there. And there's say, a Douglas fir canopy, there might be big leaf maple and seaberry. No, sorry, not seaberry, ocean spray. So we're coming down in height, and then you get into ferns and kinnikinnick or ground herbaceous plants. So all of these things interact really well together, and they have their little niche. And if they were out on their own, without neighbors, we'll say, they would not do nearly as well or survive at all. So it's this interconnectedness between plants, and we can mimic that, whether it be in an ornamental setting or in a medicinal setting, edible. I mean, you name it. You can combine all this quite easily. It really does depend on what you're trying to do. So here are a few examples. It might be a hedgerow, a windbreak. It could be intensive annual or perennial garden. Really does depend what you want to do in that specific space. So a few things you want to do is consider the goal. So what are you trying to achieve? And that may be, it could be just aesthetically, you want it to look beautiful. You may want it to be productive in terms of its medicinal um, output. You may want it to have some edible yields. That really is going to depend on what's going on here. I know we're doing a major renovation on our landscape. It started last fall, and I'm finally getting into planting a few areas. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures of them, and I don't know if that would come across well in this early stage. But my goal in these new areas is for edible medicinal. Um, so that's kind of the way and culinary, right? So I'm trying to combine like horseradish and elephant garlic and oca. Um, Gosh, what else do I have out there? I do have some ornamentals mixed in here and there. Gomi, I got some gomi berry. So you do want to have a goal. Um, then what do you hope to achieve? And it may be just habitat, right? So that's one advantage of some of these ornamentals, and that was where I started my career, was in the ornamental arena. But there are, plants like Nepeta that just have huge value in terms of their pollen and uh, to enrich bee habitat. So there are some good things about these more common ornamentals that you can integrate into your landscape. So you may have some existing plants that you're trying to integrate into, and that describes probably 90% of our work for our clients is they're often in an existing landscape, and we're removing plants that we don't deem as value and kind of building on the assets that they have. And then do a little bit of research on those plants that you have. And this is a good exercise to go through. But honestly, with myself, I probably spent a decade researching plants when I was much, much younger. And I still have a fascination, and I'm always looking at new plant material now. But it really did help set up a good foundation for myself with what I was trying to do in the world. And so this you'll find is an ongoing process. It takes a lot of time. You read about these things, and then you play with them yourself, and you may have mixed results. I've a good example is I purchased Camellia sinensis, which is tea. It's a tea plant, and everything I read told me it wanted sun. So I tried it in the sun, and it just got burnt, and was quite unhappy. So I moved it into the shade, and that's more what I see. Um, Camellia, it's the proper pronunciation, but Camellia enjoying is some relief from the sun. And yeah, it worked out really well. So, you have to take things with a little bit of grain of salt and see how it works out in your own on your own context. So, um, what are we hoping to get here? So we want to have two images. So we want a plan view of the drawing and a section view of the drawing of what you're proposing. And it's not a bad exercise to go through, because we then get to look at how these plants are going to look when they're in their full grown state and how they interact with each other. So some of the considerations, the ecological services and functions, the yield, why have you put the plant in that position? these are great things to ask yourself. I would have had a hard time answering some of these earlier in my life, because I really did plant by feel, so to speak, and that's hard to articulate in words. Um, how you'll ensure adequate space for effective management. So this is an important piece that often gets overlooked, and I'd say especially with woody plants. And we were really lucky. We kind of hit this one on the head early in our life, where we would ensure there was adequate space for all woody plants, so trees and shrubs, and we would use herbaceous plants as fillers. And because they fill the voids between them, and they're quite well, we won't say portable, but they are certainly easy to modify. You can dig them up and split them fairly easily. Not all of them, by no means all. Like asparagus would be something that doesn't want to be disturbed. But for the most part, a lot of them you can. And so you want to have adequate space there, but you don't want too much, because if you have, let's say you lay out your um, shrub planting, say you had, well, just as an example, you had blueberries, which is a fairly common plant that people love to put in. And let's say you gave them 6 foot spacing because you wanted lots of space to pick, and you didn't have a lot of material in between them. So you'd have all of this open ground that really then becomes a problem in terms of a potential problem in terms of maintenance. So if you have bare ground, you're going to find that um, going to have opportunistic plants come in and occupy it. So I would encourage you, if you're laying out shrub material, to consider that herbaceous layer, that lower layer, and fill it up with plants that you want to see there. Um, and as time goes on, if you need to pull some away and make more space for the woodies, then, that's fairly easy to do. But you then control the ground, and that's what it's really about, is controlling what's going on, as bad as that may sound. You do want to have a leg up on um, weeds, etc. The other option, or the other advantage, of course, is when we're looking at, I'll bring up a picture here. I'll just start my photos, see if I can find something. When we are looking at a landscaped area, and it's got a good amount of infill to it. Um, we know that there's less light hitting the soil, so we are going to end up with much less in terms of evaporation and weed opportunity. Okay, I'm going to just stop share and show you a picture here that I often will show people. So this is a photo this is 1 year after planting in a project we did on a 100-acre farm. And this is strictly ornamental, but it has a very wild feel to it. It had to go with the fields that were beyond. There's a bunch of hay fields beyond here. So a lot of ornamental grasses, and you can see there's very little opportunity for weeds to get going here. The evaporation via the soil itself is lessened. So even in the summer, you stick your hand down between some of these plants. It's cool and moist down there. And this is what I mean by this layered effect. So we have a tree canopy, we have shrub canopy here that is harder to see with the grasses in full swing. And then we have these grass layers and the herbaceous layer here, and that could come down even into ground cover. But in this setting, ground cover would be tricky because it would tend to get wiped out fairly easily. There are lots of examples from that particular project, and that's what it used to look like. That beautiful stonework that was done there, just absolutely phenomenal. It's very rare to see this kind of work. No mortar, it was all dry stacked walls, and took 3 masons about 2 years to build. But I shouldn't spend too much time on that. I'm gonna go back to where we were. All right. Sorry, I can get distracted easily with plants. Should have a t-shirt that says that. So if we take a look again at some of the things to consider, effective space, even, for harvesting, you'd want to be able to get in and harvest. Design by subtraction, that's an interesting approach. So if you have your shrubs laid out and you have space in between, what does that look like and how could you optimize that? There are different ways of planting. If we went back to that picture, you would see that we had some clumping of certain items and we had drifting. So we drifted plants through the landscape. And from an aesthetic standpoint, that gives a sense of unity. So depending on what your objectives are, if this was for a client in their front garden, you'd want to, not only have the edible medicinal component if that was your objective, but you want to try and pull that all together with aesthetics. Um, curvilinear rows, so some nice curves versus straight lines. Always a good, you don't see many straight lines in nature, although sometimes with design work, we end up with some straight edges. They tend to be on hardscaped lines, but the soft landscape can certainly soften those. So layering plants by height. So that is really important in my estimation. That's what we want to try and achieve. And you might have a solar bowl or solar access. And how do these plants support each other? Well, let's just go back to this example, which again was pre. I do not see that. We'll just go on the desktop itself. It'll be a little bigger here. There we go. Um, So if we were looking at this and how do these plants support each other, well, one thing they do is there's not a stake in the garden. There's no staking. So that was one thing that we were pretty good at is anything that was a little bit soft and had a tendency of flopping, we'd make sure that we had plants around it to support it. Now, the question in the assignment here is relating more, I would think, uh, on an ecological level. So, but inherently, a herbaceous plant is going to support a shrub just by shading the root zone, if nothing else. And much the same, a shrub shading the root zone of a tree. So, and then again, if you take those plants and just put them out on their own, they're going to behave much differently. Um, So scientific names we want and common names. So you want to try and do that. So the actual sheets that we're putting together here are going to be your existing conditions, which is your base plan, showing us the way the site is. And you're going to have a statement of purpose. And on that base map, you're going to want to the area of interest or area of focus. And that's where you're going to apply your plant system design. And then you're going to show that proposed plan. And you can have some notes on there, and then you'll do a section view and a little species matrix of that. So let's take a look at how that looks on the template file here. So this would be your existing conditions. So you'd put your base map here with a scale bar, and then your goals and your statement of purpose. And you could even insert the base map with the area of interest or area of focus. And then this is where you would put your proposed plan and then your section and then the species matrix here. This is just an example. And then how do these interrelate? What about facilitating the maintenance of this? And then it's important to consider the water and irrigation and how is that play into this area that you're proposing. Because no matter what, this is probably something most people don't consider, and it leads to increased maintenance. Is just maintaining uh, the hydrology in that area. So if you don't plan on irrigating it, that means that you're going to have to do that manually, which is going to add to the time that you're going to be able to have to put into it. So let us take a look at a few examples that people have done in past classes here. So this person, this is their existing plants. So it's already an established garden. And they had some goals here. They wanted to improve the soil. They wanted to create more privacy and some food production from native perennial shrubs. So they're very specific goals. And then this was their proposed plan for that. So they grayed out all of the existing plants and all the new plants are in color here. So this was not a profound change to the landscape. It was more of a increase in density, I would say, but it was completely acceptable to do that. And this is in quite a large portion of the overall design, so it doesn't necessarily have to be that. This is actually a duplex unit, and this was the student's portion of the landscape. So she did a beautiful section drawing, and as much as I think this looks great, my personal preference is for more variation in height here, but it really depends on what you're doing and how you can get away with that. So, and then here is another, I believe she did 2 sections. Yeah. And here's another one looking in the other direction. And then the plant species matrix. And that, and some notes here. So she did a nice job. We can look at another one. Again, this is a smaller area, right? And you'll notice this is north up at this point. So here's the base plan, here's the area of interest. And then this person rotated this area, which is completely acceptable. I know everybody hears me talk about north up all the time, but when we get into more details, you can do any sort of rotation that you wish. And in this case, she has reflected that north arrow appropriately. So this was really just creating a landscape in this space. I believe there's a few existing plants, but again, densifying that. And then a section drawing showing different kind of terraces that were planned. So that is interesting. I find it really interesting looking at other people's work. We all get inspiration from, well, probably nature is the primary, but it's fascinating to see what other people do. And yeah, I really enjoy it. So here's another example, existing conditions in the area of interest. This is a little less clear, right? So this is the base plan, and the area of interest here. And this is quite a large area that this person was renovating. So it doesn't have to be that. You don't have to take too much on. She could have just done this, right? Or this. I mean, but she decided to do all this. And ultimately, that's going to play into your overall design. The section drawing was really nice. And again, this is all in context, and these are raised beds or hugel mounds. So, it is a very different setup to just an open garden. And then we can look at another one here. So again, here's the area of interest and the overall base plan and the goals. And then this proposed planting, sorry. So it's going to be a guild that focuses on apple tree and then a whole bunch of material around it, some shrubs, some herbaceous, some annuals, and then a nice section. So when you put together a little section of that portion, you can see, yeah, I'm covering off that tree shrub perennial element and how it's going to interact. So there's certainly value in doing that. And then again, these just listing the plants that are going to be used. Some of these, like miner's lettuce, it's very short-lived. It'll probably only be there year one. And same with the lupin, California poppy may or may not be there. They enjoy disturbed areas, but the following year it may not be there. It may just be a sort of a pioneer planting. So that's four different examples for you. Is there any questions at all? Does anybody have any questions? I was going to show you a couple of examples of what my wife and myself have done here. They are going to be a bit different because they're more planting plans. We don't do, small system designs for people. It's more over larger overalls. Oh, actually, yeah. I'll have to pull up something here. Just bear with me for a couple seconds. Okay, Sabrina has a question here before we go on. What factors do you consider when deciding to remove a plant? Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, I would first, when I'm documenting existing plant material, we would look at a couple of things. We'd look at the health of the plant, what its contribution is in terms of to the overall, what the goal is for the area. So let's say you wanted to, let's say you had an existing planting and say there was a gooseberry that wasn't very happy. So it didn't look very good. It was maybe getting crowded out by other plants, but you wanted to more of an emphasis on edible plants. So in that case, you may want to remove something, maybe there's an ornamental plant beside it that actually even looks better, but it's not fitting with your overall goal. So you might want to favor the gooseberry and give it some space. So that's part of it is its current condition, the overall goal, what you ultimately see, how you see it playing a role in the overall scheme. So if you had a really tall, say you had a large existing shrub that was really not in a good place. Maybe it was right at the edge of the planting. So you, instead of being kind of an anchor to a planting, it was really in a bad location. I mean, that may be a reason to remove it. Um, in my earlier years, removing plants was much easier, and I see them more as sentient beings now, and I do um, give them a lot more consideration, try and work with them. Um, but ultimately, I probably have a harder time with that in my own landscape, especially after this year. We did a major reno, and I had plants I'd put in 20 years ago that we basically just ripped out with an excavator, and that was tough. But with the overall goal we had in mind, it just was not going to fit. So they are tough decisions, and I don't know if they're completely right or wrong. Hope that's helped a little bit, Sabrina, but it is really context specific. So, all right. We had a client. I'm going to just share a design here with you. This client had this is their sector compass, of course, but you can see there's a couple of trees right here. There's three of them, three existing trees that they had on their property. Two of them we removed and could even have taken the last one, but we took these two out. And in this case, well, A, they weren't in the greatest health. I should get my little pointer tool here. There we go. These were not the healthiest, but they were in the way of access. So we needed to, this was the main thoroughfare to demolish the back garden here. Um, when I say garden, it was an old retaining wall and patio that had to be demoed, and everything had to come out via this side entrance here. So these had to go just because we needed to bring in disposal bins and equipment, and so even if they were beautiful, they would have had to have been removed. So let me try and get to a planting. There we go. So this is kind of what we do with our planting plans. So of course, this isn't just a small section. This is a big overall picture. Try and make it a little larger. And this is a part of a package that we put together. So we go through that concept phase, we do water, access, soil, and then the plants are sort of the uh, The plants are the icing on the cake, really. So let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. Over on this side, what we do is we'll do an overall plan, and then I like to show the tree and shrub distribution on its own, and then the perennial distribution. And that gives our clients a really good idea of what to expect, because the tree and shrubs are going to offer more year-round structure. And these are the perennials are, you know, the icing, so to speak, and that kind of infill. Let's take a look at the back here. So we do a shrub. In this case, there weren't any trees here. And now the reason for that, we have one existing hazelnut that was right here that we used, and these are all Douglas fir. So we were actually backing onto a large coniferous area. But luckily we had light here, a very hot area right here, microclimate. So this is where the clients wanted to sit. And so we sort of did a landscape that wrapped around them. This was not very wide, as you can see. I'm sure I got a scale here somewhere. There we go. So this is probably 6 or 8 feet wide, so quite narrow. And it's not something we normally do, but in this context, it worked. So with these kind of narrow beds, we often will do, you know, shrub infill, and then that really splits the bed in half. So we have a viewing area on the back and then one on the front here. So you have all these edges to worry about, a lot of edge. And when you're planting and designing, believe it or not, this edge takes a lot of effort. The middle goes by pretty quick. And here we had a rain garden. It's not shown. I had to move the rain garden, so it went out on its own here. And we just had a detail there on it, but I'm not going to sort of get into that. But there you go. That's a little section drawing we did, and that was useful. I had to do this just to say, okay, we're on a slope. It was right at the edge of what we should be doing in terms of a rain garden, in terms of the slope that we were dealing with, and what were we going to do with all this material. So we had to kind of create a mound on the downhill side, and then figure out our flood height, our soil heights, and we did a little drain at the bottom as well. You know, here's another reason to do a section. We did an enclosed vegetable garden for these people, and as you can see, there's quite a slope, and every side, like the north was not as sloped as the south, and vice versa. So I had to do this just to figure out how to pull it together and get the materials that we needed to, you know, we had to price this. So, and that was our hardscape plan. But getting back to the landscape, the soft landscape, again, this is kind of the thing that we do, but our software allows us to, each one of these symbols is what's called a hybrid symbol that has data associated with it, and then we tag it so that, you know, anytime I use that symbol, it's an aronia, which is very helpful, makes it super quick, and it'll count up how many aronias there are. So that's these numbers here is the quantities. And then ultimately, if you do put together a planting for a client, it's nice to have a plant list, similar to what you have in the assignment here, but this list is what gets sent out to a nursery for pricing and for availability. And in this case, we had the rear garden, and then we had the front separated, because this ended up being kind of a multi-phased project. So again, this, tree, shrub, perennial, and the perennial is the edge. And then there's all these awkward spaces in and around these trees that we have to deal with. And you can see we used some comfrey in here. I love using comfrey around trees, even if regardless of whether they're ornamental or edible. Comfrey is just such an incredible herbaceous plant, provided it's that blocking variety that doesn't spread. You do not want that. That's not an asset in the landscape. Yeah, so that's one example. Got many of them. Just wondering if we should. Is there any questions anybody has at all, or are you feeling like, hey Max? Yeah, go
Hey,
ahead if you have a question.
yeah, so I'm curious if you have any resources that you could direct me to for like livestock safety in reference to plant lists. Like if you've got any good ones, because at this point, pretty much all of the areas that I'm thinking about and shoving plants in, sheep and pigs, like are the management strategy.
Yeah.
And it's always like another extra layer just to go through and do due diligence to make sure I'm not killing the livestock, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a really good question. And I was showing you things here that did not that were not agricultural. Let me just show you a little farm plan, or one layer of a farm plan we did. And that might help to answer your question. Um, is in terms of resources, going forward after this course, I'm just going to stop this for a sec. Hold on. The best resource that I've come across for farm design and information is the Agrarian platform. And they have a workplace here. And even if you didn't sign up for the design component, I think there's a pretty minimal monthly fee that you can just access their general group section here. This is, in my estimation, this is the ultimate, because most of the people involved in this are farmers, um, and they're designing their own spaces. So, so if we get to climate, like this is the Agrarian platform. These are 10 different layers that they have in here. So if we get to fencing or ecosystems here, really when you're putting together livestock, let's see if they've got, so let's say you have this kind of a tree planting that's young, you'd have to obviously fence it in some manner. It might be temporary electric, it might be, um, gosh, it's going to take a little bit to find an image here that might help. It's a very deep question. Um, most of the younger, there you go, there's good examples. So this is an old corn field. So this person has interplanted, um, it looks like they're going to be interplanting rows of trees here. But if you were running livestock through here, you would have to have fencing up. Now, not necessarily permanent fencing, but at least some electric. These are pretty narrow rows. Is that kind of where you're going? Like,
That is definitely where I'm going, but I'm also thinking specifically about like plant toxicity.
oh,
Um,
yes.
and I
Ah,
mean, generally, I'm like, if I'm looking at plant lists, I'm going and then cross-referencing with whatever the extension office has or something. But there's all of those lists. There's always still questions, and a lot of the native plants aren't really conventionally used alongside livestock, and so it's hard to
right,
find good sourcing on that.
right. Yeah, I touched on that a little bit. I took a coppice agroforestry course a few months ago, and I did get a little bit of info on that. Yeah, that's a very good question. It would be really specific to your location. Um, and I would dial into like a lot of let me just see if I can find something here while we're talking. If you guys haven't checked this out, it's regenerative living online. Uh, Javan Bernakovich, one of our instructors, this is his hub. It's incredible. Really good at resource. I'm just trying to find the, of course, there it is. A big part of this course was, not a big part, but definitely fodder came up as a purpose of coppicing and doing hedgerows for use for livestock because that was, before the days of real serious hay production, that's what farmers would often use. Um, as mm, as far as a really good resource on that, I'm going to write that down. I'll have to get back to you on that one. That's a that's a question I can't answer you off the top of my head. But let me look into that, Max.
Great,
And
thank you.
I can even I can post something on the Agrarians. Let me
That's
just
awesome. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Let me just I can do a quick search here. There you go. There's a little bit on fodder for horses. Was it specific livestock that you had in mind, or was it just kind of a general what plants to avoid? Oh, you're muted.
Definitely a general what plants to avoid, but specifically sheep, pigs, chickens. Um, I guess horses are relevant too in some areas.
So this person here has got a link for willow, hazel, and ash for fodder. So let me just I'll copy that link and put it in the chat here. You can take a look at that if you want.
Wonderful. Also, if you don't mind, Jamie, while everybody's here, I'd love to plug or invite everybody. We've got two more work parties this month uh, out at the place. One of which is Friday, the weekend of the 12th, and then I think the weekend of the 26th as well at the end of the month. And one of those will be infrastructure work, working on outdoor kitchen bathhouse thing, and another one will be like garden focused.
Right on. Yeah, you should consider posting that on the discussion board. See if
Yeah,
you
I
have
plan on
anybody.
it.
Right on. Yeah, without diving into this too deeply here, um, I would certainly once this course is all done, and given your context, Max, I would check into the agrarian.org, their website, and just look at what their sort of entry level membership is. It might not be too bad. And
Yeah, I've been planning on that too. I just feel like I don't have the time or bandwidth to tap
I
into
get,
that and make good use of it.
yeah, I get it. Totally. This might be a good fall winter thing for you, but it's a really inspirational. I mean, you could spend hours every day just going through the posts that people will put up here. And um, there we go. There's another agroforestry. There's a blog here. I can put that in the chat. So that might be worth looking at. Yeah, that is a huge topic, and the agricultural systems are just so interesting. I'm not on a farm, but I certainly have a draw to them. So hopefully that helps you out, Max.
That is great. Thank you.
No problem. Does anybody else have any questions today at all pertaining to lesson number 8? And of course, I think some of these examples sort of indicated it doesn't have to be a huge space that you're looking at. Even if it is on an agricultural setting, that's hundreds of acres, you can just dial into a very small part of that. All right. I will stop share here. Okay, well, if nobody has any questions, we will wrap up today's meeting. And thank you very much for everyone for attending. I really enjoy the Q&A Zoom meetings. I have a lot of fun with these, and really appreciate everybody's participation, and look forward to checking out your lesson 8 assignments when you have those put together. And if anybody gets into any, if you have any trouble through the week while you're working on it, you can either drop me a note or put it in the help discussion board, and I'm happy to help you out, work through any challenges you come across. So, all right. Well, you take care, everybody, and thank you again for attending today, and hope it's given you some information that'll help you with this lesson. So take care, and we'll see you soon.